probably about 5-6 months ago, Chris Holbrook wrote a commentary on the need for ballot access for parties other than the major two parties. And I remember reading it, and I remember thinking, who is this person? He writes well, he's got a great concept, let's see what we can do. So I asked my legislative assistant, Veronica, could you please get in touch with this person? And she was able to do that, and Chris came in and we met, and there was a real melding of the minds. From there, I reached out to Representative Elkins and said, what are your thoughts? And Representative Elkins has far more expertise in this field of discussion than I do. So I don't have a lot to say other than letting the people behind me speak more, but I would like to, if I could, I'd like to just share U.S. Senator Dave Durenberger's comments, because I reached out to him and I said, Senator Durenberger, what do you think? And would you like to be at the press conference? And he said, I'd love to. He said, but you can't get me to Minnesota in the middle of a snowstorm. So this is what he said. He said, this is the right time in our state's history to serve as a shining example of inclusiveness and create greater access to our election ballot for citizens who support candidates running outside the major two parties. Republicans and Democrats alike can benefit from welcoming more voices to the arena of political discourse. Fear of competition or political jockeying for control should not limit options for Minnesotans in elections. I really believe that. So what we have here is we have a lot of people who are committed to let's level the playing field. Let's not do this. Let's not operate out of fear. I'm disappointed that we don't have more bipartisan senators and representatives here. But you know what? You walk before you run. So at this point in time, I'm going to turn it over to Representative Elkins, and thank you for being here. Representative Elkins.
Thank you. Yeah, I have the distinction of having been a Senate endorsement of both the Democratic Party and the Independence Party, which I, still, hold that, old affiliation fondly. As Senator Jensen said, I very strongly believe that the more divergence of diversity of viewpoints that we see on the ballot on Election Day, the more likely it is that a particular voter is going to see their viewpoint of view respected. The more likely there is that person will vote, and the overall voter turnout will be better, and that all of the parties will benefit. So I'm really happy that Senator Jensen reached out to me about this initiative, because this is something that I really believe in. And I'm going to turn it over to Chris Holbrook to introduce the other folks here today.
Great, thank you.
Thanks.
And thank you, Doctor. So first, I just want to express extreme gratitude for the courage and leadership from Senator Dr. Scott Jensen and Representative Steve Elkins. Without them, we wouldn't be here right now. So we're just going to give each party 1 minute. They have a chair or representative here. We're just going to go in alphabetical order. We're going to go with the Grassroots Party. Grassroots-Legalize Cannabis Party chair could not be here. I have a 2-sentence statement to read on his behalf. All parties here support this. Chris Wright says that he read the article in the Star Tribune on the repressiveness of our electoral process. Yes, other states are much less repressive. Despite the fact that we got major party status, your point that the threshold should be reduced for major party status is totally correct. That is my input, and I give you encouragement on this important issue. Chris Wright. From here, we'll go to the Green Party co-chair, Samantha Pre-Stinson, followed by the Independence Party chair, Mark Cardenas, CD6 affiliate chair for the Independence Party on behalf of Phil Fuhr. And then the Legal Marijuana Now chair, Michael Ford. I see he walked in. It's snowing out for anyone who's just catching this, so some people are running late. Then you would follow, Mark, you're welcome to come up, please, Michael. And then I'll come in with my minute, and then Nick Sarwalk, he's the national chair of the Libertarian Party, and then we'll circle back to Dr. Jensen. So, thank you, Samantha.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon. My name is Samantha Pre-Stinson, and I am one of the co-chairs for the Minnesota Green Party. And Minnesota residents suffer from some of the worst disparities in the nation. We signed on to this coalition because it's time to end the political oppression that's happening in our state. The barriers that our current law created has fed the false spoiler narrative and feeds the beast of fear politics. The third parties in this state have been working tirelessly for the last few decades to ensure that diversity and inclusion in this state is not a matter of tokenizing folks for political expediency. This coalition is about access and equity in our process. We often speak of best practices and data, so why not join the rest of the nation by moving this bill to committee? The two-party system is not representative or reflective of our values, and it has led to extreme polarization and both ineffective and irresponsible governing. This bill and the parties signed on to this coalition are proof of what can happen when we stop arguing over ideology and focus on the mutual alignment by putting the best interests of all Minnesotans first. It's time to level the playing field.
Good afternoon. Mark Cardenas with the Independence Party of Minnesota. First, I want to thank Senator Jensen and Representative Elkins for their leadership in bringing this legislation forward. The Independence Party for 27 years has been providing Minnesotans with another choice at the ballot box. We're the party of Ventura. We're the party of Tim Penny. And in the last election, we had over 100,000 Minnesotans vote for us in a Secretary of State race. Yet today, we're not considered a major party in the current format. This legislation helps to level the playing field for parties like ours. And the message is simple: provide Minnesotans more choice at the ballot box so that they can choose a candidate who best represents them. Again, I want to thank Senators Jensen and Representative Elkins, and look forward to seeing this bill get through and to the governor's desk. Thank you so much.
Where's yours, Michael?
Hello, I'm Michael Ford, Chairman for Legal Marijuana Now political party. In 2014, we ran Dan Vack for Attorney General. He was able to get 60,000 votes, yet it wasn't enough for us to get major party status. We were only able to become a minor party in Minnesota. After 4 years of hard work, lobbying for our issue, running in different races, vigorous collection periods of collecting signatures, we were finally able to make major party status. It's my belief that the legislators should support our issues, and if they don't support our issues, we should elect people that do support our issues. And if you do get out and do the work to collect the signatures to get on the ballot, and you actually do get on the ballot, register the voters, and get the votes, you should be able and entitled to the same privileges as any other major political party as far as subsidies and ballot access. That's all I have. Thanks.
Guess that brings it back to me. So I'm Chris Holbrook, the chair of the Libertarian Party. I would just like to point out that my party alone in this state over the last 5 years has received over 200,000 votes. That includes municipal votes, which currently have resulted in us having 8 Libertarians serving on city councils right now. That's another 200,000 people. The other parties up here have done a lot more than us. So the point isn't to bump chests about parties and compare notes on that. The point is to give a frame of reference about how many people are represented by the parties being excluded from the system. It's not insignificant. It's not flippant by any means. In Minnesota, the statutes make it 5 to 10 times harder by the numbers to attempt to run for office than in any nearby state if you are outside of the two-party system, which, according to a recent Gallup poll, is 57% of people. The hurdles to get on the ballot here are outdated, arbitrary, and targeted to stifle legitimate third parties. Isn't it time we start embracing diversity and inclusiveness in our political system, something that hundreds of thousands of Minnesotans want? We asked for a committee hearing on these issues. We welcome any amendments. I don't know why anyone would be opposed to having this discussion. It's overdue, and we ask that you contact your representatives to insist on that at your earliest convenience. Thanks.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming out in the snow. I'm Nicholas Sarwark. I'm chairman of the Libertarian National Committee. I just want to impress upon you that Minnesota is an outlier in ballot access restrictions for parties that are not one of the 2 old ones. The only states that have worse restrictions for the creation of a new party are California and Maine. And Maine has actually lost in court at least twice and is probably teed up to lose in court a third time regarding the constitutionality of those high barriers. This is not an area that Minnesota wants to lead in. This is something that needs to be changed and fixed. And one of the things that I'm so happy to see both Senator Jensen and Representative Elkins realize is that this is not about us. It's not about the political parties. It's not about the politicians. It's about Minnesotans. It's about Minnesotans having their voice heard in politics. And it's about people who are entrenched in power not wanting that voice to be heard. And with that majority of people not choosing to align with a traditional political party, ignoring those voices, I've seen it happen around the country. You think you can stifle it, and it just ends in lawsuits, and it ends in backlash, and it ends in losing power. Whereas if you bring those voices into the debate, you have a more powerful public dialogue, you have a better political system, you have a better state to live in, and Minnesota can go from being a leader in how hard it is to start a new political party and bring those new voices in, to being a leader in how easy it can be. So I sincerely hope that the committee brings this bill to a hearing, that it advances through both the House and the Senate, it gets to the governor's desk, it gets signed, and Minnesota can go back to breaking ground in new ways that are positive for Minnesotans and an example to the nation.
Thank you very much. Briefly, we're going to turn it over to question and answer. But before we do that, I'd like to ask a couple questions. Is the two-party system delivering the kind of political discourse and legislation that you're looking for? When someone's denied a subsidy for a governor's race and the two major parties get almost $500,000, does that strike you as fair? If you have to go out and get 130,000 signatures in order to get your candidate's name on the ballot, while in a neighboring state it's only 10,000, is that fair? And then on top of that, if you happen to be so unfortunate to have had the wrong size paper, the names don't count. And if you do sign a petition pushing someone forward so that they can be on the ballot, should you then have to sign a pledge that you'll deny yourself the opportunity to vote in a primary? This really isn't about us. This is about every citizen of Minnesota and every citizen of this country. And it's on you. We're just the spark. But if we're going to get a flame out of this, you have to step up. You have to call your legislator and you have to say, there is no reason for lack of courage on this issue. You can have the discussion. You can put up the guardrails you need if you think you need them. But by damn George, the discussion should take place. We stand for questions. Yes, sir.
Hi, we're talking about a state of what, 7.5, maybe 8 million votes, 8 million people?
5.5 million.
They really want alternatives, and yet the major parties have not given them those alternatives. They're forced out of the system, so they have to select something that's less than optimum for them. How effectively do you think you can get this pushed through?
Well, I'm going to turn this over to Representative Elkins, but Representative Elkins has been a champion on this issue. And in many ways, the fate of this bill, this session, rests on his shoulders more than mine. Representative Elkins.
I'm not sure what the path will be, but I'm committed to doing my very best to getting a hearing for this bill in the House Elections Committee.
How much help do you need from us?
As much as you can provide, I guess.
What Representative Elkins meant to say is we need you to call your legislators and say, it's not acceptable to not give this issue a hearing. That's just not acceptable. And that these folks here are bright, smart people, and they're persistent, and they have memories. Other questions? Yes.
Do you think this is going to be become a partisan issue in the legislature? And do you have any advice for us on how we should approach this discussion?
You've heard enough from me. Why don't I let Mr. Chris Holbrook take a shot at that? Because his perspective is an interesting one, and perhaps there are other panelists that would like to speak on it as well. Go ahead.
Thank you.
I would just, without getting into the weeds of the details, which you can find on the papers in the room and online, We're trying to frame it in the positive reform aspects, to which Dr. Jensen already mentioned. The number of signatures for a direct full ballot access status is over 10 times what any neighboring state requires. The percent of vote after election to do the same thing is 5 times what our neighboring states require. Also of huge importance to us, I would emphasize the number of days allowed to collect nominating petition signatures. In Wisconsin, you get 70 days. In Iowa, you get 140 days. In South Dakota, you get 112 days. In Minnesota, anyone know the answer? 14. You get 14 days. So we just want to be able to compete and engage. We understand there has to be integrity in the system, but let's find that balance, and let's change the form and the oath on it itself to be inclusive and not exclusive.
I was also going to say that we've received a few responses, at least within the Green Party, and the interesting thing is that one of the things that has come up is integrity. But nobody has provided any data that shows that in any other state that has a lower number, that there's a lack of integrity in elections. And if there is, it's certainly not because of the threshold. Another thing I would say is also remember to reach out to all of your elected officials, regardless of whether or not they identify with you politically or not. One of the things that I have learned is that the folks that tend to lean to agree with me more are actually the ones that are not answering back or are replying back with things about integrity or that third parties are a threat to democracy. And as a veteran of this country, I find that offensive. If I can serve my country and I'm willing to die for it, I should certainly be able to run in an election and have it be fair just like it is for everyone else.
Can I just add one little? So I saw this in Oklahoma when they modified their ballot access restrictions, which were at the time some of the most restrictive in the nation. And there was a split within mostly the Republican Party because they controlled both houses there. And there were Republicans who thought if we allow competition, that's going to allow people to leave the Republican Party because they'll have an option. But there were other cooler heads that prevailed that realized that if you have an open dialogue in the political system and you have those opportunities for different voices to come up, it actually strengthens the hand of the dominant political party because people feel like the election's more fair. They're more willing to vote for one of the two old parties if they feel like there was a fair shot at the ballot box, and they're less likely to have that kind of backlash. So it's counterintuitive for traditional political partisans, but they are in a safer place if they advance and pass this bill than if they continue to keep these barriers, because the more barriers you create, the more backlash you engender.
I'll just have absolutely. One additional thing I think regarding conversations that you can have, like's been mentioned, definitely call your legislatures and let them know how you feel. But also having conversations with your friends and family. And I put it as simply as this, I dropped a Ford, and I think Ford's great. I also think Chevy's great. But if it was only Ford and Chevy that I could choose from, I'd have a problem with that. And this is the same scenario. You don't want to have just two choices in your political system. We don't have that in any other parts of our lives. And I think that's a very simple way to start a conversation with your friends and family, and then from there move them to their elected officials. Thank you.
Thank you. So as we bring this press conference to a close, if we could just sort of imprint on our mind the scale of justice, integrity versus access. That's all we're talking about. Inclusiveness, open ballot. Thank you very much for coming. We'll be standing around later if you have private questions. Thank you. Thanks for coming. Scott Jensen.
Thank you for volunteering.